Good morning, everyone. Welcome at the second online event and altogether third event of the Media for Citizens and Democracy project, founded by the European Commission in partnership with the International Federation of Journalists. In this first section, we will have a brief overview of the project, welcoming remarks, and some updates on the Media Pluralism Monitor's insights on SLAPPs. Thank you, everyone, for joining. As you can see, we are recording this event. It's still not sure whether we can also publish it, but if everything goes well, it will be the case. And if you would like to ask questions, which of course I encourage, you can do that at the end of this section, so more or less in half an hour, about the presentations and introductory remarks that you had. This project that we introduce here is a collaboration between us, the International Federation of Journalists, and different journalistic unions, in part in the Balkans, Serbia, Montenegro, and North Macedonia, and in the EU. And it will also include in-person trainings that will start later this year and will go on till the end of 2027 or even early 2028. So first I give the floor to Elda Brogi, who is co-director or deputy director of the Center for Media Pluralism and Media Freedom and a professor at the European University Institute.
And good morning, everyone. Thanks a lot, Konrad, for your introduction. And thank everyone for joining this event today. I introduce again myself. I'm Elda Brogi. I am the Deputy Director of the Center for Media Pluralism and Media Freedom at the European University Institute in Florence. And just a few words on the Center for Media Pluralism and Media Freedom that is somehow leading the scientific part of this M4CD project, Media for Citizens and Democracy in the Digital Age project that we are running with the International Federation of Journalists and, as Konrad said, with Osservatorio Balcani and Caucaso and several independent trade unions of most of the Balkans and Italy. The Center for Media Pluralism and Media Freedom is a research center, again, based at the European University Institute that now, since 2012, has been developing studies on media pluralism from different perspectives, legal, economic, and socio-political. And I just want to flag one of the projects, the main project, the flagship project of the center, that is the Media Pluralism Monitor. That it's a project, again, funded by the European Union that every year analyzes and assesses the risks for media pluralism across the European Union and in some candidate countries. And indeed, Sofia Verza, who will speak after me, will probably delve into this project in the part in which is devoted to analyzing SLAPPs, strategic lawsuits against public participation, and the measures taken by the European Union in order to tackle that abuse. As Konrad said, the M4CD project focuses mostly on organizing events that should raise awareness and examine real-life examples and develop a strategy to and create a sort of critical mass and a European and global discussion in order to tackle some of the issues that are at stake when working as a journalist. We started with generative AI in our first event. That is definitely a new problem that the journalistic profession is facing, and not only the journalistic profession, indeed. And but today we tackle a problem that is somehow old, even if it's still somehow a problem, even if we claim to be a developed democracies. It's a problem that we acknowledge and we analyze still in many, that it is very frequent in established democracies like the European Union ones, at least in some countries. And it's somehow reviving in the last years. SLAPPs, strategic lawsuits against public participation, are legal actions brought not to have justice, but to intimidate, silence, create economic burdens to those who speak out on matters of public interest. And I must say that the European Union itself has acknowledged the problem, the fact that these actions are frequently raised against activists, journalists, and are a problem for our, let's say, developed democracies. And in recent years, the European Union has approved a directive to fight, create, to ensure some tools to address SLAPPs in cross-border cases. And this is definitely a first acknowledgement of the problem at European level, something that has put somehow also the role of journalists, media pluralism, media freedom at the spotlight in the European Union policy on media. And I must say also, unfortunately, because of some very sad and horrible cases had triggered the European response to and the fact that the European Union stepped in more concretely in addressing SLAPPs and issues linked to media pluralism in general. And in the end, the anti-SLAPPs directive on the one hand and the European Media Freedom Act indeed are the result of the acknowledgement of the European Union of this need. And so we have, I think, to use this occasion, the occasion of this project, of these events that we are organizing, to delve into common standards. I always stress the importance to share practices, experiences, and good practices in order to create a common knowledge, create a common knowledge of the indicators that define a strategic lawsuits against public participation, tools and remedies to tackle this kind of problems at cross country level, but in particular to push also reforms at national level and to tackle more effectively concrete cases. So I do hope, and this is my wish for today and for the rest of the project, that this type of events and that should be characterized by high participation can all hopefully go in this direction and can create, help sharing good standards and ways of addressing problems that are that are essential elements of the quality of our democracies. So, speaking about strategic lawsuits against public participation speaks also of the quality of our democracy. Therefore, I want to use the opportunity to thank everyone participating and those who have organized the event, and in particular Nisrine, Salameh, and our Konrad, Bleyer-Simon. And I wish a fruitful discussion today, and I give the floor to my colleague Anthony Bellanger for his introductory remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elda, and thank you, Konrad, for inviting us. Anthony Bellanger, I'm the General Secretary of the International Federation, and I'm particularly pleased to take part in this event because in the view of the International Federation of Journalists, SLAPPs have become one of the most serious threats to independent journalism in democracies. The IFJ represents 600,000 journalists across 148 countries today. When we talk about SLAPPs, we are talking about legal actions that take the law away from its primary purpose. Their aim is generally not to seek justice. Their aim is to wear people down, to wear them down financially, to wear them down psychologically, to wear them down professionally. When a journalist spends months or years defending themselves in court, they devote less time to investigating, verifying facts, or informing the public. Among the many cases monitored by the IFJ, that of Daphne Caruana Galizia remains particularly striking to me. She was killed in 2017. I have had the opportunity to meet her three sons on several occasions over the past few years. Her children often recall that even before their mother's murder, there was already an ongoing campaign of intimidation. Daphne was facing numerous legal proceedings. She was the target of defamation and harassment campaigns. Some of these proceedings even continued after her death. This case shows just how far the desire to silence a journalist can go. But it also shows that SLAPPs never affect journalists alone. They also affect their families, their colleagues, and sometimes their entire editorial team. Data collected over the years by the IFJ and UNESCO, the IFJ is one of associate members of the UNESCO, often reveal a similar pattern of escalation. It begins with smear campaigns, online harassment, economic pressure, or abusive legal proceedings. Then sometimes come direct threats, physical assaults, arbitrary arrests, or violence. And in the most serious cases, this spiral can lead to murder. Of course, not all journalists who are victims of SLAPPs will ever be murdered, but almost all journalists who have been murdered have previously been the subjects of warning signs, threats, intimidation, hate campaigns, surveillance, or judicial harassment. Faced with this reality, the IFJ has always considered that it was not enough simply to denounce violations of press freedom. It was also necessary to create concrete early warning and protection mechanisms. It was in this spirit that the IFJ and our regional group, the EFJ, helped establish the platform for the protection of journalism and the safety of journalists under the Council of Europe. It was in 2014. This platform has now become one of the main European mechanisms for monitoring breaches of press freedom. Partners organizations use it to document murders, assaults, arrests, detentions, threats, and restrictions of press freedom, as well as abusive prosecutions targeting journalists and the media. Our aim is to highlight violations, document trends, and ask governments to respond publicly. No attack on a journalist should go unnoticed. Impunity often begins with silence. This platform also enables us to identify worrying trends across the Council of Europe area. In particular, we note that SLAPP-ed has become a tool increasingly used by politicians, powerful economic actors, companies, rich individuals seeking to prevent the publication of information in the public interest. The mechanism is always the same. A journalist exposes a corruption scandal, an environmental scandal, abuses of power of human rights violations. The response is disproportionate legal action designed to intimidate, isolate, and discourage. Very often, the complainants have considerable resources at their disposal. Very often, they know they may never win on the merit of the case, on the front of this case. But they also know that a legal battle lasting several years can be enough to undermine a journalist or an independent media outlet. That is why the adoption of this European anti-SLAPP directive represents a major step forward. But we all know that a directive is only effective if it is transposed in every member state. We need mechanisms enabling judges to swiftly dismiss manifestly abusive proceedings. During our last World Congress in Paris on 4th May, the IFJ also established a high-level body to defend press freedom worldwide, not only in Europe. It will be launched in a few days' time with all the IFJ global legal partners and with all our IFJ affiliates. We need dissuasive sanctions against those who use the courts as a weapon of censorship. We need accessible legal aid, particularly for independent journalists and small newsrooms. And we need international solidarity. SLAPPs, therefore, do not concern press freedom alone. They concern the quality of our democracies, the transparency of our institutions, and our citizens' ability to access free and independent information. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Anthony. And looking at the time, I will not talk a lot now, but give the floor to to Nisrine Salameh. also from the International Federation of Journalists, who will give a brief overview of the project, how it will look like, what we should expect from the coming 18 months. Nisrine?
Yes, good morning, everyone. Thank you for organizing this this event, Konrad, and thank you for Elda and for Antonio for being here. Yes, I know that we are really short in time, so I will be as quick as possible. So I just wanted to give you an overview about this project that we are implementing together with EUI. So the project is called Media for Citizens and Democracy in the Digital Age. It's fully funded by the European Commission, and it will last for 2 years. So as Anthony said, we represent 600,000 media professionals across the globe in 148 countries. So the IFJ, with our partner, we implement different type of projects and themes in our regional offices in Asia, Africa, Latin America, Europe, and the Middle East and Arab world. We cover gender equality and equal representation in the media, working conditions, through collective agreements, national consultation, and negotiation with the government, of course. We work on digital and personal safety and the security of journalists, and we are currently implementing a project on tackling surveillance on journalists. So the climate change also is one of our main components, and the information integrity, press freedom through monitoring, attacks on journalists, and campaigning for the protection of journalists, including anti-SLAPP directive. And as Elda said, of course, the new problems that we are all facing is the artificial intelligence and its impact on the journalistic work. To go back to the project itself, so the project, as I said, it will last 2 years, and it is composed by 25 national and regional webinars and conferences. So if you are in one of these countries, please contact the unions, because we will have these roundtables and discussion in one of these countries. So Italy, Hungary, Montenegro, North Macedonia, and Serbia. So Elda talked about it earlier. So it's like 2 components in this project. One is the impact of AI, and the other one is how the directive on SLAPP. And the aim of the project is to have national consultation and see how we can combat and promote, let's say, the ethical use of generative AI and addressing the threats posed by SLAPP. So finally, these are our partners. So the European University Institute, the Centro per la Cooperazione Internazionale, OBCT, the FNSC in Italy, the Federazione Nazionale della Stampa Italiana, the Independent Trade Union of Journalists and Media Workers in North Macedonia, the Independent Journalists Association in Serbia, NUNS, and the Trade Union Media of Montenegro, TUMM. So as I said, if you are in one of these countries, please follow the unions and follow the IFJ and EUI, so you will know the activities that will take place in the dates and places. And finally, if you were here 2 weeks ago, you will know about it. We are currently with Konrad doing a study on artificial intelligence and its impact on the journalistic work. So please, if you can have a click on this QR code and fill the questionnaire. It's like 7 minutes questionnaire, and it will help us a lot to do this study by the end of the project. Thank you very much, and I wish you a very good webinar.
Thank you so much, Nisrine. And yeah, sorry for the bad vibes about running out of time. I think it's not that much of a tragedy, so it's not that we need to run. So Sofia, feel free to talk about the topic at the length that is needed. So Sofia Verza is in charge of the fundamental protection area in the Media Pluralism Monitor, which also covers SLAPPs, and she has a good overview of what happened in this area over the last year, how it has changed over the years, and what are the greatest risks and problems that we need to pay attention to. So I will give the floor to Sofia to give us an overview of the Media Pluralism Monitor insights.
Thank you very much, Konrad. So good morning, everybody. Maybe I would briefly summarize the project, the Media Pluralism Monitor, giving you an overview of what is it and how does it work. So the Center for Media Pluralism and Media Freedom is running this project since 12 years. Where we monitor the situation for media pluralism and media freedom throughout the 27 member states of the European Union and the candidate countries. We have a network of researchers that are based in each of these countries, and they write yearly monitoring reports that we publish usually around the end of June, and this will be the case this year as well, with an assessment of the risks for media freedom and media pluralism in their country referred to the year before. So, for example, now we will publish MPM 2026 in the end of June, and it will be referring to an assessment of 2025 risks in these countries. I am linking in the chat of this call the link to our website and specifically to this projects page, where you can find these national reports, both in the national language and in English, and a general report that is offering a comparative overview of the results and analyzing a bit the general trends with a comparative perspective. So what I would like to briefly present you today are a bit of comparative results that are emerging from this year's analysis that will be published exactly in the end of June. So from the MPM 2026, we can deduct a few trends. Some of them coincide with the trends that the Coalition Against SLAPPs in Europe has also identified, and you will speak later with one of the members of this coalition, Sielke Kelner. We know that the majority of SLAPPs usually take place and are based on national defamation laws, but the trend of using different vehicles, legal vehicles for these abusive lawsuits is also increasing, especially with regards to data protection laws. This is the case, for example, in Hungary. There are many examples of lawsuits that have been raised basing on GDPR-alike laws. Based on the MPM data, there are still 20 countries in the European Union where defamation has not been decriminalized. So there are still criminal sanctions connected to the alleged crime of defamation. Usually, abusive lawsuits are raised against individual journalists, and the main causes for raising these kind of lawsuits are investigation into sensible topics, as also Anthony was mentioning, so like corruption or environmental related investigations, for example. And also in this case, comparative results of the MPN show that environmental activists and journalists covering environmental topics are increasingly under threat, both because of being the targets of abusive lawsuits, but also they are under threat from a more general perspective related to online harassment and also physical harassment on the streets. Oftentimes the plaintiffs, so the subjects raising abusive lawsuits, are powerful subject. We know this is one of the key criteria for defining what is a SLAPP. So usually they are a corporation or public official or high-profile business persons, and the trend of having politicians or public officials raising abusive lawsuits is also on the rise. According to the NPM 2026 data, there is a high risk score associated to the number and nature of SLAPPs in a number of countries. And this high risk is present in Bulgaria, Croatia, Czechia, France, Greece, Hungary, Italy, Malta, Poland, Slovakia, and Slovenia. You can check, starting from the end of June, the national reports for these countries specifically, but for all the countries in the EU and candidates, and have more specific insights on why these countries score a high risk with regards to the number of SLAPPs taking place in these territories. So we, through the Media Pluralism Monitor, we asked to the national researchers 2 specific questions with regards to SLAPPs. One is exactly connected to the number of strategic lawsuits taking place in their country and the nature of these lawsuits. And I just listed which countries score a high risk for this. And then we do a second question that regards the existence of anti-SLAPP legislation in the country and its effectiveness. As you might know, in 2024, the European Union enacted the Anti-SLAPP Directive, and the 7th of May was the deadline for the transposition of this directive. So I guess this document might be of interest also for non-EU followers of this webinar, because it sets some standards that could be useful for other contexts as well. At the same time, there is a main major limitation of this directive, which is that it only focuses on cross-border civil lawsuits. It means that when the parties involved in the lawsuits are both residing in the same country, the directive does not apply. So it is desirable that the member states will transpose or are transposing this directive with a wider scope of application, namely considering also domestic lawsuits. In fact, as also the data from the case coalition confirm, only 8.5% of the SLAPP cases across Europe have a cross-border nature. So actually focusing on domestic abusive lawsuits is key. And according to the data collected through the Media Pluralism Monitor and the national transposition tool in the European Commission website, so far the Anti-SLAPP Directive has not been transposed yet. Despite of the deadline on the 7th of May, it has not been transposed in all the EU countries, but it has been transposed in Cyprus, Finland, France, Latvia, Lithuania, Malta, Slovenia, and Sweden. So in our national reports this year, you can find more details about what do these national transpositions law contain specifically. What I can already tell you is that only in a few countries the transposition has considered a wider scope of application. So in most of these countries, the transposition was limited only to cross-border civil lawsuits, leaving out therefore criminal lawsuits and domestic lawsuits. In other countries, there are discussions ongoing about the transposition of the directive. These countries where some draft bills are under discussion in Parliament or some committees have been formed for discussing this transposition are Belgium, Croatia, Estonia, Germany, Ireland, Italy, Luxembourg, Poland, Romania, Slovenia, Slovakia, Spain, and the Netherlands. And also in this case, in the national reports that will be published in the end of June, you can find more information about what is the discussion going on, how civil society organizations in these respective countries are influencing the conversation. There's a lot of great work being done by journalistic organizations in these countries and apologies, and other actors in order to push national parliaments to adopt wider scopes of application for anti-SLAPP legislation. As Elda underlined and as other of the speakers that will intervene today pointed out in reports and academic articles, the presence of SLAPPs is one of the signals that can help us measuring the quality of our democracies or tendencies towards autocratization. So it is very important to keep on monitoring the nature and number of SLAPPs in our countries, and also to advocate for better legal frameworks in order to prevent these from happening. Thank you very much, and I also wish it will be a fruitful webinar today.
Thank you so much, Sofia. Are there any questions from the audience? If there are, feel free to ask them in the chat. In the meantime, I would like to ask the members of the next panel to all of them just say one sentence, whatever they want, just so that we can check whether the microphone works properly. So maybe we can start with Sielke.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me.
Hello, thank you for joining. The next one is Paulina.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me.
And then Joschka.
Hello.
Hello. So it seems it works well. We already tested Simone, but if you want, we can test you again.
Please do. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yeah, you work as well. Yeah, perfect. So it seems like there are no questions on this introductory part. So I would probably just introduce our speakers then for the next session. I see that now the name tags work fine. Sometimes there is a bit of a mix-up, and but I think Joschka has fixed it. So we will have the interventions in alphabetic order. But I will start the introductions in reverse alphabetic order. So our first speaker who I introduced for this session on experts sharing insights on SLAPPs is Joschka Selinger. He's a lawyer and head of the work area Democracy and Fundamental Rights at Gesellschaft für Freiheitsrechte, GFF, in Germany, which can be translated, or I saw it being translated as Society for Civil Liberties, I think. And he has been with the GFF since 2020 and works in particular on cases relating to fundamental communication rights, such as freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, and academic freedom. Joschka is involved in anti-SLAPP litigation, has published on the EU SLAPP directive, and has been an expert witness in the German Bundestag on the transposition of the directive into German law. Then we have Paulina Milewska, a PhD researcher in law at the European University Institute, who was also a Fulbright Schumann Scholar at NYU Law School, working at the intersection of constitutional law, democracy, media freedom, and human rights. Her research focuses on strategic lawsuits against public participation, judicial independence, and democratic backsliding in Europe and in the United States. She has collaborated with institutions including the Helsinki Foundation for Human Rights and the European Center for Press and Media Freedom, and her work has appeared in the European Constitutional Law Review, Verfassungsblog, and the Columbia Journalism Review. She also served as an expert for the Polish Governmental Commission investigating state-driven repression against civil society and coordinated work on reports concerning SLAPPs and harassment targeting journalists. And alongside academia, she has extensive experience in journalism, civil society advocacy, and international policy work related to the rule of law and freedom of expression. And Paulina will also be the moderator of the next session, not this one, the one after, with journalists. Then we have Sielke Kelner. She's a researcher and advocacy officer at Osservatorio Balcani Caucaso Transeuropa, where she works within the Media Freedom Rapid Response, a Europe-wide consortium addressing violations of media freedom. In parallel, she coordinates the Media Advocacy Action for Moldova, a collaboration platform linking Italy, Moldova, and Romania to support Moldova's alignment with European standards on freedom of information and media pluralism. Sielke also serves as coordinator and spokesperson for Case Italia, a network of 15 Italian civil society organizations that support public watchdogs targeted by legal harassment, as part of the coalition against SLAPP in Europe. Before moving into nonprofit sector, she earned a PhD in history from the Geneva Graduate Institute and completed a postdoctoral fellowship at Leiden University. And the organization that she represents is also one of our partners in this project. So they will also organize their own workshops later this year or next year. And then we have Simone Benazzo, a PhD student in political science and teaching assistant at the Université Libre de Bruxelles, as well as a fellow at the Media and Journalism Research Center. His research focuses on journalistic resistance in autocratic contexts. Before joining the ULB, Simone worked as a freelance journalist for 4 years, covering mainly the Western Balkans and contributing to over 40 Italian and European titles. He holds a master's in international relations from the University of Turin and a master's in European studies from the College of Europe. And with this, if there are no questions in the chat, but anyway, if someone wants to ask questions about the first session but didn't manage to for some reason, you can still do that after this panel. So with this, I'll give the floor to Simone to give a short presentation about his topic of expertise.
Yeah, I'm gonna share the screen now. So, yeah, can you see my presentation?
Yeah, it works fine.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for having me here. And I'm very sorry for my voice. Actually, I fought during the weekend, not against SLAPPs, but that's why I have this voice. So I was given 7 minutes, and I will do the best to make it the more interesting out of them. So my presentation will focus mainly on 2 different topics. The first one is like the role or the potential role of press slash media councils. And the second one is actually like the general location, the general position of SLAPPs within the general political process that might be happening in some specific countries. Before I start, it's important that I point out that what I'm going to tell you today it is based on a research that I had the pleasure to conduct together with 3 great colleagues of mine. You can read their names there on the slide. And basically what we did, we collected data from self-regulatory bodies, so media and press councils first. And second, we asked 4 experts to conduct focus groups in 3 countries, namely Northern Macedonia, Croatia, and Germany. So what I will present to you today, it is based on this empirical research. It's important to point out, though, that these data were collected a while ago. So we're collecting between 2022 and 2023. So they might be too old, maybe a bit old to a certain extent. Still, I think that the general perspective that I'm going to share is still valid today. Before I start, so when we think about the self-regulatory bodies, media and press councils, we need to keep in mind that they are in relationship, in a very varying relationship with 4 different groups of actors, not just journalists and media and the plaintiffs when it comes to SLAPPs, but also the general public, and I will insist a lot on this point, and the legislators and the regulators. The colleagues before me, they spoke a lot about the EU directive against SLAPP, about the fact that the EU governments are expected to transpose that. So we expect the legislators and the regulators to do something about SLAPP. But sometimes we might find out that they do exactly the opposite of what they're expected to do. And I will make myself clear in a couple of minutes. So when we think about the role of press councils, and I think that this presentation can be interesting for everybody that is following this webinar, regardless of the fact that you have a very active press council in your country or you don't, because basically if you have it, you know what you can get out of them. If you don't have a press council, or if this press council is not so active, you know what you can push for. So based on our data, we realized that there are 2 different approaches that press council can embrace when it comes to SLAPP. The first one is being very proactive, so stepping in and defending journalists and speaking about the importance of media freedom and clearly explaining that SLAPPs are direct attacks against democracy, not just against that specific journalist, that specific media, or also depending on the composition, they might embrace a more neutral stance and mostly just reacting to attacks, but for instance, not conducting advocacy measures or reaching out to the public. And this is also like a model that is applicable when it comes to the relationship between legislative and regulatory bodies and the press councils. Some press councils are more inclined to go for confrontation, so they confront legislative and regulatory body. They actually try to push them to implement the laws, to keep up with the implementation, to devise like better laws, whereas other, they tend to have a more cooperative approach. And it's important to point out that in our research, we're not being very normative, we're not being judgmental. So this is actually, it's a neutral picture that emerged from the data. Then it's up to you to decide whether you think that a cooperative or a confrontational approach works better. These are the overview. This is the overview about our findings. And I want just to point out that much to our surprise, only 1 press council, namely the British one, had a clear definition of SLAPP. This left us with the impression that even if there is a lot of talking about SLAPPs, when it comes actually to defining what a SLAPP is, and even more when it comes to clearly explaining what a SLAPP is, we might come across a high variety of definitions. And this is also maybe something that we will address today. So the first thing would be for a press council to clearly have a definition of SLAPP that can be implemented when they receive a complaint. When it comes to the active roles, what emerged from our data is that there is just a few media council, press councils that they think that they can actually play an active role. For instance, when it comes to offering legal representation, and we heard something from a previous speaker about that, or even better, when they can even act in an arbitration function. So they somehow actually implement what is called like the early dismissal mechanism, which is something that basically is a pre-legal negotiation between the plaintiff and the SLAPP target. a key role that press councils, regardless of their approach vis-à-vis the government and vis-à-vis the legislator, can embrace concerns research and advocacy. And I think that this webinar is very crucial for this kind of endeavor, but it should be picked up by press councils. So clearly explaining what SLAPPs are to the general public, to civil society, can somehow defend journalists and defend independent media from vicious attacks, especially when they come from the government, when they are top down. And I'm mostly going to focus on these attacks from governmental figures. Here you have a model that we devised for our second article. And as you can see, actually, we put journalists and media at the center because they are the actors that we wanted to focus on. But then you have like these other 5 domains, 5 dimensions. Social dimension, which means civil society, the financial. So we know that there are certain entrepreneurs, that there are certain businessmen, that they are like slap freaks. So they love slapping media. They know that it's highly likely that they're gonna lose in court. Still, they do that because of the reasons that we were told before. Then we have the political and institutional dimension. And here, of course, actually, it strongly depends on the politicians because some of them, they might be very much inclined to use SLAPPs against critical journalists. And I will speak about an example at the end of my presentation, whereas others are more sensitive when it comes to the instances of free media. Then we have media, councils, associations, so all the organized forms of journalists and media. And then we have the judicial dimension. Interestingly enough, and even worryingly enough, in some cases, for instance, Croatia, judges were themselves among the plaintiffs. So there were cases where Croatian judges, they sued critical journalists because they felt defined by them, which is a bit concerning if you think that judges are precisely the ones that would be expected to apply these laws. And here, I know it looks a bit convoluted, but here we try, and in the article that I can share with you later on, I think it's clear we try to map the different interactions that these actors can have among them. Here, there is a list of what we define as strategies of resistance against SLAPPs, mostly focusing on the role/potential role that media councils can play. And I want to raise your attention, to focus your attention on the fact that, as I anticipated before, many of these strategies of resistance, they concern the public. So I want to emphasize this point because we know based on our data, based on our research, that sometimes journalists, they feel ashamed because they have been slapped. Sometimes actually they get too self-critical and they think, oh my God, maybe I did something wrong in my work. That's not the case. That's not the case, right? So it's important that we reach out to civil society, that we clearly explain why you are being slapped. And this can also be done before the slap, which means actually like organizing sensibilization campaigns, organizing advocacy initiatives. And I think that this is crucial because when a slap case then emerges, then we have a public that is somehow more receptive to the claims that can come from journalists and independent media. And here I want to end on this note, which I think is crucial. And that's also why I was so happy to be the one speaking after Sofia Verza, because she mentioned this concept of autocratization. And I think that it's important when we focus on SLAPPs coming from governmental figure that we move beyond the idea that SLAPPs are a measure of the quality of democracy, and we walk the line to the next step. When we speak about autocratization process, we speak about the opposite process of democratization. So we speak about a political process that some political actors are implementing in order to build a quote-unquote new system. And in some cases, and of course, this does not apply to all of them, but in some cases, when SLAPPs are initiated by governmental figures, by the prime minister, by members of the government, by institutional figures, by the judges, they become part of this process of general autocratization. And a clear example is the SLAPP that was launched by the current Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico against Peter Bardi, who is the editor-in-chief of Actuality, which is the most popular news website in Slovakia. And it's quite clear in this case that when we have a prime minister that since coming back to office in late 2023 has heavily, at least attempted at heavily autocratizing Slovakia by, for instance, dismantling and replacing public service media, by attacking the opposition very viciously, it's quite clear that when such a political figure launches a slap against the editor-in-chief of the most popular independent news website of the country, this cannot just be dismissed as an attack of democracy. Speaking in general terms, this is a part of a political process that we can label autocratization. Peter Bardi was sued, and Fico is asking for 100,000 euros of compensation only because he used this picture of Fico for the cover page of his book about him. And I think that there is no need to explain why this is a slap. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Simone. And now we continue with Sielke again on the topic of slaps, but another aspect of it. So I give the floor to Sielke Kelner from OBCT.
Thank you, Konrad, for the opportunity to showcase our work on slaps. Also, I'm happy myself to follow Simone, and I will try to build some bridges with his theoretical framework, hopefully. I think that Italy offers a very useful case study for understanding how legal harassment against journalism evolves with political actors that usually normalize an antagonism with independent media, but also try to limit the engagement with civil society, which is the case of Italy. So what are the features of the slap phenomenon in Italy? The overwhelming majority of slaps are really enabled through defamation provisions, and this can take the shape both of civil and criminal lawsuits. To be sure, Italian politicians have a very long-standing tradition of resorting to defamation provisions to silence criticism, and especially criticism of independent media. However, what we have observed, and that under the current government, the number of legal intimidations has skyrocketed, and resorting to slaps has become really systematic for them. Obviously, this dynamic amplifies one of the structural elements of slaps, which is the imbalance of power between those who resort to legal proceeding and those who are the target of. So the data that has been made available both by CASE, the Coalition Against Slaps in Europe, but also by the Media Freedom Rapid Response, confirms this alarming trend in Italy. So I will just quote a couple of data to allow you understand the phenomenon. So for 2 years in a row, CASE has assigned to Italy the negative record for being the European case with the highest numbers of slaps recorded, which were 26 in 2023 and 21 in 2024. This is not an exhaustive study, it's just a qualitative one. And from 2020 until today, the MFRR has recorded 112 legal incidents in Italy. And this is somehow connected to what Sofia was mentioning, because more than 44% of these legal alerts have been initiated by politicians, and very often these politicians being high-ranking public officials. So in Italy, the use of slaps by public figures, so actually ministers of the current government as well, is part of the broader contraction of the public space for contestation in Italy. And this somehow aligns, I guess, with the argument that Simone was making about slaps being a tool of autocratization processes, because the trend of SLAPP cannot really be dissociated from more worrying attempts to limit media freedom, such as political interference in the public broadcaster, but also to limit freedom of expression as the criminalization of climate dissent in Italy. So although the problem of legal harassment being very serious and severe in Italy, the implementation of the EU directive hasn't been really a priority of the current government. So both throughout the work that we do with the Case Italia, so the Italian working group against SLAPPs, but also as part of the work that we do with the MFR, we have been trying to propose a dialogue, a conversation with the Ministry of Justice, first on the proposed directive in the autumn of 2023, and later on with the actual directive. We secured some sort of meetings at the beginning of this year, although we have encountered a significant reluctancy from the institution when it came to having a candid dialogue about the directive transposition. In the meantime, in March this year, the Italian Parliament has passed what is called the European Delegation Law. So this law actually grants to the government the mandate to transpose the directive, but also to define what they mean by cross-border, which is obviously key for the reasons that have been discussed before by Sofia. This kind of formulation is really combined with the comments that have been made by the Prime Minister at the beginning of the year during the January press conference. And they signal that the government wants to limit itself to really a copy-paste of the transposition. And this would mean leaving without protection, obviously, more than 90% of the SLAPP cases in Italy. So really, in a nutshell, the current government is not treating the SLAPP phenomenon and not even the transposition of the directive with the seriousness it would need. And what we fear is not only a delayed transposition up until today. So the deadline for the transposition expired last month, but up until today, there is no discussion within the ministry about a possible transposition. And what we fear is really a minimal transposition of the directive. And if so a poorly transposed directive will amount to a little more than lip service to what the European Commission is asking from the European governments, and the government will keep continuing sidelining independent media while claiming that it complies with the European standards. So in such a context of a political elite that is really hostile towards civil society, but also media professionals, the key question is how not just journalists can defend themselves individually, but how union and also cross-border coalition work together to compensate for a weak and a bad transposition of the directive. So we try to connect all these dots, and at OBCT we both coordinate Case Italia, and in doing so we try to support SLAPP targets. We try to do that by working closely with the broader case coalition, European coalition, and to evaluate SLAPP cases. So we have a clear definition of what is a SLAPP and a clear evaluation of which cases represent the SLAPP. This also allows us to advocate publicly for them and to do some trial monitoring, so to support the SLAPP targets throughout the trial and draw the attention of the public to them. Most importantly for today's audience is also the work that we do through the MFR, because it's dedicated to just media professionals and not SLAPP targets in general. As consortium, we do monitor and respond to media freedom violations, obviously, across the European space, including legal threats. And we do offer not only data collection on SLAPPs, but also we support targets through legal support, and again, a dedicated public advocacy. I will stop here and happy to go more into the detail of the Italian case study if there are questions and on the work that we do in Italy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sielke. And I give the floor to Paulina then.
So thank you again for inviting me. And in my speech right now, I will focus on the Polish example, and I will present Poland as a seminal case study for how SLAPPs work during the democratic backsliding. So between 2015 and 2023, Poland was going through the process of democratic backsliding. It happened after Law and Justice Party, together with its coalition, won the election in 2015, parliamentary one, as well as their candidate, Andrzej Duda, won the election for the president. It's very important to underline in the context of SLAPPs that during those years, Poland went through a significant rule of law crisis. Many courts were captured, especially and most importantly, the Constitutional Tribunal as well as the Supreme Court. And in many lower courts, some judges, right now it's like estimated that around 3,000 of judges in Poland are unlawfully appointed judges. So that translates into a significant pressure that those in power, those governing, could approach these judges with. During that period in Poland, according to my research, we had more than 300 cases of SLAPPs against journalists and media outlets. All of these cases that I researched were the cases against independent journalists and media. It is important to understand that Poland, differently than Hungary, still during all of backsliding years had a very strong media scene. Most of the media outlets stayed independent. So just like in Hungary, the main tools of targeting media were buying them off or just like simply sometimes closing them down. In Poland, those tools did not work. Of course, like state-owned media were turned into a propaganda tube, but private media had to be targeted differently if you wanted to silence them. So that's why SLAPPs became so popular in Poland. The most important example was Gazeta Wyborcza, which is the biggest daily newspaper in the Central and Eastern Europe. And it's a newspaper where I used to work as a journalist. And Gazeta Wyborcza during that period had around 146 SLAPPs cases. Most of them were SLAPPs initiated based on the right to correction. And this is the most abused tool in Poland. There were a few criminal law cases and some number of personality rights cases, but actually the right to correction proved to be the most abused and the most likely used in Poland. Some of the cases against Wyborcza and different media outlets in Poland were coming from the Minister of Justice and the Ministry of Justice itself. So you can imagine the mix with taking over the courts when the case that a judge has to decide on is coming from Zbigniew Ziobro himself. Those cases were actually based on correction rights. What is important, the correction in Poland was since 90s a law that is very imbalanced in sense that when it comes to legal dates that both parties has to keep, the date for the reply for the defendant is 7 days. So the moment since the newspaper is getting the petition for the correction, as the editor, you only have 7 days to reply to it, and all of the other terms in the during the legal process are similarly created, which puts a significant burden on the journalist and the media outlet anyway. Even more, during the democratic backsliding, one of the correction cases reached the Supreme Court, and the new precedent judgment has been delivered, which made it even more burdensome on the media when it comes to correction cases. And that meant that during the 7 days before the trial, just after you are getting the request for the correction, you not only have to say as the editor, well, I'm not in your legal document, I'm not publishing the correction due to this and this article of the press law. You have to present all of the potential proofs you would present during the case. Otherwise, you cannot use the proof that you have all of the proofs that this correction wouldn't stand the burden of the proof of truthfulness in the legal case later. So to prepare all of your proofs, you just have the 7 days when you are replying for the request for the correction. Most of all of the independent media in Poland were dealing with similar cases. Not all of them were as open as Gazeta Wyborcza when it comes to sharing who were the plaintiffs and how many cases exactly they got and based on which articles. Usually the articles were covering the newest policies of the law and justice, and based on the legal agreements I was looking at the Ministry of Justice, they basically had 2 legal firms that were following all of the independent press and checking if there is any mention of any law and justice important politician or any politician from Zbigniew Ziobro party. And then they were automatically submitting sending legal documents to these newspapers. After the pro-democratic coalition won the election, Ministry of Justice withdrew a number of cases that were still hanging about independent media and independent journalists from the courts, based on a special legal analysis prepared for the experts who decided whether they are SLAPPs or not. And just last week, the anti-SLAPP law was introduced in Poland. So we introduced the directive and we proposed a higher level of protection for SLAPP targets. Nevertheless, what is still problematic, nothing changed when it comes to laws on correction. So in case that in a year, which is sadly likely, Law and Justice will be back with a new coalition, probably the situation of SLAPPs in Poland wouldn't change that much. So maybe I will stop here, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Paulina. And now I give the floor to our last speaker for this session, Joschka Selinger. Joschka, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction, and thank you so much for having me. I will speak to the German situation around SLAPPs, and I will try to keep it brief so that we have some time left for discussion, which is always the fate of the last speaker, but I will really try to keep it short. We at GFF in Germany, we have been working against SLAPPs for quite a long time. And the biggest problem that we have been facing and that we are still facing is that the dominant view in Germany amongst legal scholars as well as professional organizations, judges, lawyers of the judiciary is that either SLAPPs do not exist in Germany, or that they may exist, but they are rather a problem that affects other countries, such as Malta or Hungary, while in Germany we have constitutional guarantees and a working judiciary. That's why in Germany the topic of SLAPPs has had very little political urgency, and also the German government in negotiating the anti-SLAPP directive rather played a role in slowing it down. However, what we have seen since several years in Germany were anecdotal cases, at least, that mostly also affected journalists. Some of the popular examples include a case by the Kingdom of Morocco against the federal newspaper in Germany, Süddeutsche Zeitung, where the government of Morocco sued the newspaper as well as two journalists for damages amounting to 50 million euros, which would have, of course, bankrupted the journalists, and a case that was only dismissed last year after it was pending for more than 10 years. Also, another example is that of the family of Hohenzollern. It's a German family who, a noble family who were involved in Nazi crimes. And after a book on the history of the family and their involvement in Nazi crimes was published, they basically sued any newspaper, news outlet, or historian that would report about the publication of this book. So these were around 120 cases filed by this family to suppress criticism against them. And what we're seeing right now, and which kind of differs what Simone and Sielke had mentioned, is that right now we're not seeing many SLAPPs initiated by government officials, but rather we're seeing SLAPPs initiated by the far right political parties as well as individual representatives, which is kind of interesting because maybe Germany is in the process of autocratization. It might be like a few steps behind still. However, the far right is catching up and they are really professionalizing. They have become very good at fundraising, specifically for raising lawsuits. There are some law firms that now represent far right actors only, and who are like in the past, lawyers from the far right in Germany may have been not that professional. Right now, they amount like from the professional level to commercial law firms, and so have seen a rise from that side. The empirical picture, as I had mentioned, in Germany had been very scarce for a long time. However, in 2025, the first empirical study on SLAPPs was published in Germany, which was based on an online survey to which 227 participants reported their own experience with intimidation attempts and SLAPPs. And some interesting results of the study are that journalism is specifically affected in Germany. Around 60% of the respondents were SLAPPed because of their work in journalism. And also the study shows that also in Germany, SLAPPs do not only exist, but they also amount to a very big financial and psychological burden. Among the reported cases, around 1/3 had a value in dispute between 100,000 and 500,000 euros, and 15% had a value in dispute between 200,000 and 100,000. I don't exactly recall the numbers, but it was like around 45% had a value in dispute above 100,000 euros. And at that point, litigation becomes very costly. Another interesting result from the study is that it demonstrated a clear chilling effect. That is that around 1/3 of the of the persons affected by SLAPPs said that they had been discouraged from future publications. So that the effect of the SLAPP is not only the individual case, but rather goes far beyond that. One of the largest problems in Germany is also not only the pre-litigation area. So it's really not clear from the data, but we assume that only a very little number of intimidation attempts actually reaches the court, but the intimidation starts in the pre-litigation sphere because they usually start with warning letters and cease and desist demands. And also these letters create a cost burden on the people affected by those letters in Germany. So many people just try to will not engage in litigation and rather pay and comply with the cease and desist demand rather than go to court. When we look at the legal structure in Germany, we don't have any clear legal protection measures. So this starts with the fact that the cease and desist demands go along with costs, and that there is no specific mechanism to dismiss abusive lawsuits in court. So even if a court case or a lawsuit is completely unfounded, it will likely take some years for a court to dismiss it in Germany, and financial and psychological effects that come with it. Not only is the legal support framework very insufficient, this goes also for the support structures in Germany. While the EU Commission had in 2022 already issued a recommendation to the member states to create a focal point for SLAPP, people affected by SLAPPs, and which is also part of the directive now. Germany has not yet really complied with that recommendation. And the German federal government had funded a no-SLAPP contact point in Germany for 2 years. And also now in its efforts to transpose the directive, they refer to that funding as the point of compliance in which they transposed the recommendation by the EU Commission to create a no-SLAPP focal point. However, the funding was only for 2 years and will now be discontinued, which means now that even the only state-funded limited support structure is not being secured on a permanent basis. When we look at the transposition of the anti-SLAPP directive, it's going to be minimal implementation. We had seen a very good first draft by the Ministry of Justice that would also have covered domestic cases. However, in the parliamentary process, the implementation law has been changed, and now we're very likely to see minimal transposition that will not benefit those affected by SLAPPs. In Germany, with the practical consequence that also many journalists, and most of them independent journalists or small outlets, will continue to be largely left to fend for themselves. Thank you so much for the attention, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Joschka. And I think all of these presentations were really thought-provoking and insightful. I mean, just regarding the last one, I find it really interesting that in the past there were so many cases when I spoke to German either journalists and experts, and they often just said there are no SLAPPs in Germany. So it's really good that you have done this research, or that there's this new research out there which shows that this is actually not the case. So even Germany is not immune to this problem. And I just wanted to share a story of a SLAPP which I just saw this morning, and I saw it and I considered it really shocking. There is this Facebook whistleblower, Sarah Wynne Williams, who wrote the book Careless People, in which she exposes some of the internal wrongdoings inside Facebook and Meta. It was published last year. She used to be a really high-ranking manager at Facebook herself. So he published this book, and apparently she was sued by Meta. And there was an event at the Hay Festival yesterday where she was about to speak or have a conversation with Carol Calvados and Tim Wu about her book, for example, and some other topics. And basically, due to the lawsuit, she had to sit there without talking. Carol even asked her, can you blink with 2 eyes if you think it's yes, and 1 eye if it's no? But I think even that didn't work out. So SLAPPs can be really extreme, and they can come in many forms, and they can really impact the way that in which we can discuss issues of public interest. And I would turn to some of the comments and questions that we have received. Tiana Blagojev mentioned a case in Serbia. So judges also prosecute in Serbia repeatedly sometimes. The case of Krik, for example. I think we don't have to go into the case of Krik in detail now because we will have a journalist from Krik in the afternoon session who will be able to talk about that. There was a question to Paulina, can we receive the reference of the Polish law implementing the directive? Can you answer in comments to the person who asked the question? And there is a question from Albin Sibera. So a question to panelists. It seems to me that there is a varying degree of collecting the SLAPPs data across the EU countries. Would you agree that this is the case? And if so, do you think this has to do with the public awareness of SLAPPs? For example, in Italy, there seems to be both more cases and more awareness. Can there be a correlation implying that in countries with smaller awareness, the number of monitored SLAPP cases can also be smaller than if standards applied in Italy, for example, to collect and monitor data were applied in other countries as well? Thank you. I'm following the webinar from a library, so I cannot speak out loud. Best regards, Albin. So who would like to respond to Albin's question? Or you can, I mean, all of you can answer if you want to, of course. Let's start with Joschka.
Yeah, thanks. I can just give a brief comment on the German situation, maybe, because really the degree of collecting data is so bad here. And this will likely remain the same even with the implementation of the directive, because actually the directive asks countries to establish a monitoring system and to collect data. And what the German transposition foresees is that second instance judgments of SLAPP cases will have to be published. So that's the only data collection point that we have. Is not only court cases where the court deems a lawsuit to be a SLAPP is to be published, but only second instance cases, which will likely change nothing. And this also alludes to a larger problem in Germany because hardly any court judgment is published. So in Germany, less than 1% of the court judgment are being published, and this is not going to change through the directive, through the transposition of the directive, which is very unfortunate. And I don't see it as an awareness problem only. I see it's really reluctance by the judiciary as well as conservative politicians to improve the situation on SLAPPs. So it's a political decision. They could have easily done that in favor of more transparency, but still most of those people still have the mindset that SLAPPs are really nothing that affects Germany and that there is no need to change that, which is very unfortunate. So speaking of, actually, I probably do agree. It has to do with the public awareness. However, there are some structural problems in the German judiciary that hinder empiric research as a whole.
Thank you. And we have a hand by Sielke.
Thank you, Konrad, and thank you to Albin for the question. Is it true that in Italy there is awareness about vexatious lawsuits? It doesn't mean there is consistency when it comes to methodology and data collection. So this a little bit weakens the argument because sometimes the union called for every time there is a defamation lawsuit, they call it a SLAPP, which if there is no evaluation of the case and the legal documents might weaken the advocacy part. I also wanted to connect to what Joschka just said, because the focal points are asked to collect data, and Italy has a focal point. That's the only advantage that we took from the European Commission anti-SLAPP package. But she lamented that she had received no guidelines, neither from the Commission, neither from the Ministry, on how she should collect this data. She has no budget and no methodology guidelines. So then it's somehow she's left without input. And so, yeah, I wanted to raise the question of methodology when we collect data so that we are consistent and we can compare data across countries.
Sofia?
Yeah, on this point, I just wanted to add that I agree with the other colleagues, and Generally speaking, the answer is yes. There are discrepancies between monitoring tools throughout the countries, and that also makes it difficult to measure the level of risk in a comparative perspective. And that has a lot to do also with the understanding of the notion of SLAPPs throughout countries. So it is also a cultural issue. The anti-SLAPP directive offers a pretty comprehensive definition of what a SLAPP is, so that might help, but still, what, for example, I can detect while I review the data that our researchers collect in each of the 27 member states of the EU and the candidate countries is that some criteria, some elements are very key for these cultural discrepancies. For example, the trust in the judiciary system. So there are some researchers that do not, if the case is not defined as a SLAPP by a judge, they do not consider the case in question as such because it has not been recognized by a first instance judgment. And so there are no, let's say, official criteria for considering it as such. I must say this is the case especially in North European countries, which are also sometimes less likely to define everything in a legal framework, but leave media policy more to self-regulation. So I guess from looking at the glass half full, what is going on also here today is that experts from different backgrounds are having more confrontations, and there's more cooperation between journalistic organizations in different countries. So hopefully the process is ongoing, and in a few years we will reach different awareness of what a SLAPP is, and therefore there will be a more harmonized monitoring system for such cases. And with regards to the Polish law implementing the directive, I'm not sure if Paulina shared it in the chat or can share it, otherwise I can also do it.
I will do it in a second. I was just listening to this in discussion. Maybe on that note, I just wanted to add to what Joschka said, that there was a very interesting article on constitution in European Constitutional Law Review written by Adam Bodnar and Aleksandra Gliszczyńska-Grabias about memory loss and SLAPPs. So they basically took one case from Poland against Holocaust history scholars, initiated by the right-wing organization, where they basically used a SLAPP in order to silence this type of research, which reminded me of what you said about this like family and the book about their Nazi history. So I think it's like a very interesting framework to look through at this kind of cases, that it's basically a way to altering how we talk about history and how to block discussing facts from the delicate parts of history of the country.
Thank you. And yeah, I assume the work of the Case Coalition or the ECPMF is also playing a huge role in clarifying in the community what exactly a SLAPP is, and helping journalists identify what exactly it is when they are SLAPPed. And Flutura Kusari from the ECPMF has also published a methodology for legal professionals and for judges, which can be used for training to help them better succeed in this area. And to some extent, it's also the aim of this project here to create similar methodologies also for journalistic professionals, or for journalists, so that we can go on with training journalists and unions in the coming 2 years. And I don't see any questions at this point in the chat, so I would like to ask something that might be relevant, especially for journalists who are participating in this event or who might watch it later. It's basically, what can you as a journalist do if you think that you are being slapped, or if you believe that you are a target of a vexatious lawsuit? Who can you turn to? I guess in Germany you can call Joschka. I don't know if the rest of you also do litigation, but let's say if you're a journalist in Poland, who would be or where should you start looking for? Because I assume there are some newsrooms that have enough money to have their own legal team who can also help them prior to publishing certain articles to figure out whether everything is okay legally, and also represent them. But the majority of journalists, and probably also lots of investigative journalists, don't have these resources.
So during this period of democratic backsliding, even the biggest players like Gazeta Wyborcza or Axel Springer were suffering when it comes to the cost of SLAPPs. It comes from the fact that even the biggest players in the country, like Poland, so the audience of the press, of the media outlets is only Polish, are not doing great financially. This is the difference between like English-speaking market or German-speaking market. For us, even with almost 40 millions of citizens in Poland, like it's hard for press to survive fully and like without feeling that they are like pressed upon the wall from time to time. And when 140 lawsuits are coming, this changes the equation quite a lot on how much do you have to spend on legal aid. During that period in Poland, ECPMF helped quite a lot, both Gazeta Wyborcza and another investigative news independent outlet Okopres. And also we have Helsinki Foundation in Poland, which is supporting and sometimes taking the legal representation in some of the cases, especially for the local journalists and independent freelancers. They are sometimes sending amicus in cases of bigger media outlets, but they are not representing them. So those were the possible two places during this period, but I would say that the demand for the help and the money and time offered by the different organizations wasn't enough during that period, for sure.
Thank you. Anyone else on this topic? Oh yeah, Sielke?
Thank you, Konrad. I will start by sharing a resource. This is the case guidebook, and it's in English, but we also translate it in Italian. So at the end of the page, you will access the Italian translation. It was written by our legal colleagues of the Case Coalition, and it's meant to equip public watchdogs with some basic knowledge about how SLAPPs work and how to possibly prevent them. Now, once, this might be an initial tool for all of us to get us familiar with SLAPPs are and how to possibly respond before getting to a lawyer, to a legal representatives. And then I would say, surely ask for your union to support you, but also reach out to us because it's only through, cross-sectoral and transnational support that we can really be vocal and draw the attention. When Italian targets reach out to us, we try to work out and to help them to identify any possible solution for them to cover legal expenses, might be through the MFR. Paulina mentioned it, ECPMF, which is the legal support provided through the MFR, or through other organizations, even organizations that are not part directly of our network. We try to direct them to legal lawyers or someone who might support them. And then I would say reach out to us, because data collection, as we mentioned before, it's also crucial in order to formulate a solid advocacy. So, yeah.
Thank you. And yeah, we also have a comment from Albin again on this topic. In Slovakia, ICJK.sk investigative center and their safe journalism platform is the important place to go to, but they also have limited financial resources. In the Czech Republic, the Czech branch version of IPI just developed similar platform based on the Slovak model. So again, we see that the country where cases are more obvious, for example, Fico versus Bardi, then these can actually provide know-how to countries where cases are not as high profile as the awareness, or the awareness is lower. And I would bring in another question, but if you have something related to the previous one, feel free to also address that. But since Sielke has also mentioned the role of unions in this, I would ask you, where do you see the role of unions or journalist associations when it comes to protecting journalists? I mean, for us, it's in this project, it's really important because the IFJ brings together unions all across the world in about 190 countries. So many of them are listening to this conversation, and they might also want to try to understand what exactly they can do. Who would like to start?
Maybe I can start. Then also, if there is time, I also would like to have a couple of concluding remarks on a couple of things that came to my mind, if there is a chance. So I think that, on this point, I think that the FJ might play a pivotal role. I think that one of the first things that press councils, journalistic associations can do is actually starting talking to each other, at least at the European level. Because it seems to me that this was also linked to the previous problem that was discussed, so that there are different methodological approaches. I think that by sharing best practices, by reaching out to colleagues from other countries, also journalistic associations can learn something. Because my feeling based on my research is that, and I think that to a certain extent this is natural, that we tend to get stuck a bit too much in our own specific case. And this might make us oblivious to the presence of similar challenges in the country bordering our home country or in another European member state. And I think that at the very basic level, this is something that should be done. Talking to each other, organizing such events, sharing best practices, maybe also commenting certain cases and discussing how they were handled, how they were approached. And I think that this is crucial. Second point, which I think is also important, I think that whatever journalistic associations or organizations or press councils can do strongly depends on their composition. So in certain countries there are different compositions. So maybe you have you have an organization where both publisher and journalists are represented, or you have two journalistic associations, maybe based on ideological attachments. So I think that we cannot expect journalistic association to perform exactly the same role in each country, because they are heavily dependent on the specific composition of their members. These would be actually my 2 points on this specific question. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, Joschka?
Yeah, maybe just a quick remark on the German situation and on a specific role that the journalists' unions played here in the political process. And it is that they played quite a big role, actually. So we have two larger journalists unions in Germany. Both of them are like, well, they're I don't know, like I would say not very left wing or I don't know politically organized, but just unions. However, they did play an important role in advocating for stronger SLAPP protection rules, because also they have a different standing in comparison to civil society organizations or just SLAPP affected organizations. Because in Germany they do have a good standing and I think they're well respected by political parties across the democratic spectrum. So when journalists unions spoke, it had a different weight other than we brought arguments forward. So actually they did quite a good work, I think, in advocating. Well, in the end we didn't get a good transposition. However, the journalists unions really did play a huge role in advocating, also as part of broader coalitions. It was a very important voice. And when it comes to individual support, I think in Germany they also do play a very important role because, of course, they have limited resources and they cannot finance litigation against any case of SLAPP. However, journalists who are members of journalists' unions in Germany, they have kind of not a full insurance, but some of the legal representation costs are covered so that it's at least possible to go get initial counseling. So this is really an important building stone in Germany.
Thank you. Sielke?
Thank you, Konrad. So the situation in Italy, union already play a quite important role in supporting journalists targeted by SLAPPs. I want to recall that Italian journalistic community has pioneered this concept, which in Italian sounds like scorta mediatica, which is really a sustained public attention media coverage when journalists are targeted by any threats, including SLAPPs. But more can be done, because a lot of times competition across the media sector and media outlets, even belonging to the same political spectrum, works against this solidarity. So more can be done there. And more can be done to support also other professionals targeted by SLAPPs. And sometimes the media, unfortunately, doesn't cover those cases. I just want to recall one case because it gives really the sense of the level of threat that reached it in Italy. The Prime Minister sued a stand-up comedian from Rome because he called her stinky. So this is for criminal defamation, and plus she's seeking 20,000 euros in psychological damages. So in Italy, we reach a level in which not just investigative journalists are targeted by SLAPPs, but even stand-up comedians are targeted by SLAPPs. So this is one thing, solidarity across sectors and even within the media sector. And another thing that unions should be focusing on is awareness raising and capacity building. Simone mentioned it, engaging with other unions from other countries. I think this is one, unfortunately, of the biggest limits. Italian union representatives are not well equipped to speak in English, and this is one of their limits because they cannot properly engage with the broader community and bring up examples of case studies, but also discuss the characteristic of their phenomenon. So it's very simple. They should hire and invest more into their language skills so they can engage with the broader community in Europe.
Thank you. And then we have Sofia.
Yes, I would like to share an example from Bulgaria that we have highlighted in the next general report. Bulgaria is one of the countries that has been identified as high risk for the number and nature of SLAPPs there. there's this case that has been involving journalist Boris Mitov, there, and the newsroom called Media Pool. They were slapped with a defamation case by judges Svetlin Mihailov. And the journalistic organization there, AEJ Bulgaria, has launched a fundraising campaign, and in less than 24 hours, they were able to raise enough funds to cover the amount that they were convicted to pay. So this is just an example of how journalistic organizations that have a good base of members, but also that are well positioned in the civil society community and more generally in the eyes of the general public, are able to do effective support, in this case of a financial nature, for journalists that are slapped. Of course, this is how to say, a short-term solution. No, there is an issue, and the community organizes a fundraising campaign to avoid the chilling effect against journalists is too high, and the cost in practice is too high for them. And this is palliative, let's say, is not a systemic solution. But still, this is one of fundraising campaigns are one of the tools for journalistic organizations to respond.
Paulina?
I just wanted to add from the Polish experience that when I was still working at Gazeta Wyborcza in 2019, nobody basically knew what SLAPPs are in Poland. And based on discussing with our in-house lawyer how many cases we have issued by politicians, and at that point we had like 50 cases against us, and it was already a very heavy burden. We started to look whether this phenomenon has some name, and that's how we found that there is something like SLAPPs. And Gazeta Wyborcza did something that nobody done before in Poland, which was publicly saying that we have so many cases, and those are the cases initiated by state-owned companies, leading politicians, etc., etc., and that it is called SLAPPs. And before that, it was considered shameful to talk about your defamation cases, because what defamation mean for the media outlet and journalists, it is a situation where someone is saying that you got your job wrong. So because Gazeta was so influential in Poland, and because we had a strong standing, the fact we did that made other media outlets to do the same.
Thank you. And Nisrine?
Yes, so thank you a lot for the ideas that you have given us. I noted everything, and we will go back to the unions and discuss it. It's important to say that maybe the project will reply to a bit of these notes. Of course, we will have exchange within the regional, on the regional level, but also on the national level. We will try to create a stakeholder and people dealing with SLAPPs on the national level. The only problem will be, again, the high cost of legal representation, which we cannot, of course, cover in the countries. So I think it's a lot of work, and we insisted to have the unions on board of the project as affiliated partners. So they are in the project because we believe that after the project, they will stay in the countries, and they need to work on it beyond the project and to keep the sustainability. So thank you for your insight, and we will need your support throughout the project in the 18 coming months.
Thank you, Nisrine. And we don't have that much time, but maybe we could have some concluding remarks. Simone mentioned that he wanted to say something anyway, and maybe also one additional question, if there is anything that comes to your mind related to that, because it was mentioned before that I think it was Sofia who first mentioned how many different actors there are who start SLAPP lawsuits. So we have politicians, even prime ministers in some countries, rich individuals, entrepreneurs, and so on. Sielke mentioned, and I think that's also very important to highlight, that it's not just journalists who are targeted by SLAPPs, but also civil society organizations. And I think the most affected are probably the environmental NGOs, which are constantly slapped by big polluters, because of course they don't want to have that bad image. And Joschka has to leave, so maybe if you want to say one or two sentences before you have to go, I let you do that, and then I finish asking the question afterwards.
Yeah, maybe just a quick remark. I think that it's really important that we keep on working on SLAPPs, because I think now with the transposition marked like one thing in time, but I think it's now really it's now starts the really important work after the transposition of the directive. Also before the courts to start now using the tools that the directive gives us to litigate in court to get better protection for those affected by SLAPPs. And I think it's really good now that you start this project and that we can keep our good work up. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being here. And yeah, so just to finish my train of thought, I wanted to also mention that what Paulina said about the shame related to SLAPPs, I think it's also really, really important, because I think many of us don't even think about it. But indeed, it might be undercovered because journalists might feel that if they report that they are being sued, it might make them look like they have done something wrong, or whether they have done their jobs in a problematic way. So it's really good that Gazeta Wyborcza said that no, we are not going to accept this, and we are going to proactively report that there are organizations that are just misusing the law. And basically, the question that I wanted to ask is, to what extent you think that naming and shaming of these actors who are suing journalists is something that works? And in connection to that, yeah, if there are any concluding remarks or anything that you wanted to mention but didn't have the chance to do so in the last hour, then feel free to share that as well. Simone, I see that you're trying to say something. Yep.
Okay, I can go. And my comments are not necessarily a reaction to your question, but I think that they are worth mentioning as a concluding remarks from my side. The first one goes back to something that you mentioned before, Konrad. So when you gave us the example of the Meta whistleblower that was slapped. And I think that it's quite clear, and it was mentioned many times also during this webinar, that the ultimate purpose of SLAPP is preventing the public from getting crucial information. So actually it's like shielding the powerful from public account. And again, we have the tendency to get stuck a lot on the national level. So we focus on the prime minister, we focus on the government, we focus on big entrepreneurs. But we need to recognize that the most unaccountable and influential actors in this moment are the big tech and the AI companies. They are the ones that, in my view, now they have like the highest degree of power and influence and the lowest degree of public accountability. So in my view, given that we have mentioned, I think it was Sofia before, and we all know that one of the main limitations of the anti-SLAPP directive is that it can only be applied to like cross-border cases. I think that given that I expect in the future more and more journalists, more and more civil activists to go after the big tech, I think that's going to be like a huge test for that very directive, because we know that the big tech are mostly based in the US, And I think that this is one of the developments that we might expect to see. This was my first point. The second point is the following. I know that it's very hard to leave a webinar about SLAPPs with a glimpse of hope and motivation. But we need to keep in mind that when we see a SLAPP, we know that a SLAPP is draining, is time-consuming, is affecting also the mental health of journalists, but a SLAPP can also be seen as a good sign. Why am I saying that? Because when there is a SLAPP, it means that there is a conflict. It means that the powerful is afraid that something can be discovered about him or her. We need to keep that in mind, that there is a degree of resistance, there is a degree of conflict. In Saudi Arabia, in China, we do not have SLAPPs, right? And we know why. So I think that in this very phase, where we are questioning like the role and the function of journalism, it's important to keep that in mind, that a SLAPP can also be interpreted under this light as a good sign. Because my fear, and there is a special issue that is being prepared now, it's going to be out this year in digital journalism. I'm not part of that, so I can market that. This special issue, the title will be Bypassing Journalism. And I think that this is the new phenomenon that we might be facing, where autocratizers, illiberal actors, they kind of bet on the fact that critical journalism will somehow fade away and die out by itself, so that they will no longer need to confront that. So I think that as long as we speak about a conflict, as long as we speak about a confrontational dynamic between critical journalism and illiberal actors in a specific case, and the big tech even more, we can still tell ourselves what we are doing. Critical journalism is relevant, has a function in society, and we need to be very proud of that and to advertise that, to tell the public that this is happening and this is needed. Thank you.
Thank you. I had to reshare some of the comments because I realized that by default, whenever something is shared by us, it is just shared with the panelists and not the audience. So that's why you might see some new comments down there. And now I give the floor to Paulina.
Just to address your question, I wanted to say that I'm not sure to what extent naming and shaming is a mechanism, because naming and shaming is also basically supporting the chilling effect. So when you name Donald Trump as someone who is slapping you, he's very proud to do that. He's like naming himself. Same with Netanyahu and going against the New York Times. So what they want to achieve is not necessarily, as we know, to win the case. They want to scare everyone off with the case that they are starting, with how much it will cost to defend yourself in this kind of cases. So I don't think in many of these cases we need to name them at all as the defendant or as those who are supporting SLAPP targets, because they are naming themselves. It was the same in Poland when Zbigniew Ziobro was naming himself and saying, well, I'm dealing with all of those who are lying, who are spreading lies about me. And about SLAPPs as a sign of hope, I wouldn't go that far, even though I like your interpretation. I think this is the sign that the democracy as such is starting to be destabilized if those who are initiating SLAPP cases are the governing actors. So when the state is abusing the position as a private individual to create even more pressure on freedom of expression. And I would rather call it another tool to dismantle the system than something that is a sign of like, you know, the body fighting the bacteria. So maybe that's all.
Thank you so much. And we have Sielke.
Thank you, Konrad. I will try to address your question from the Italian point of view, but also from the advocacy point of view. And to spell out that there is obviously a time when you seek, as a working group working on this thing, when you seek a dialogue with the institutions, might be formal or informal, and then there is a time for naming and shaming. And this needs to be assessed by local stakeholders. For instance, we are going towards, next year we're going to hold national political elections, and we have the chance to raise the issue of SLAPPs and to bring it on the agenda of the political campaign, for instance. And then there are other instances where it's necessary when I already mentioned high ranking public figures involved, it is necessary to name them, because I will mention just one case that ended up in 2023 and involved again the Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, who sued for criminal defamation intellectual and writer Roberto Saviano. That specific trial ended up with a conviction in 2023, but the judge actually acknowledged the mitigating circumstances for very high and moral and ethic considerations of the writer. And I want to say that in those cases, it's absolutely necessary to name and shame, because when a prime minister is involved in such a vexatious lawsuits indirectly, it puts a pressure on the judicial system, even in countries where the judicial system is independent. So the role of civil society is, and of the media, obviously, is crucial in covering those cases.
Thank you so much. Are there any other thoughts that you would like to share before we close for now the session in the morning? If not, I would like to say thank you to all our panelists, speakers, and also our audiences. I think it was really interesting, and I think we managed to touch on many different important aspects. There might even be some solutions that we can test. So yeah, thank you so much. I see there is a comment. Yeah. No, yeah, we had a hand from one of our participants, but I asked her if she wanted to ask a question, and there was no response. So probably there's yeah. So that's it then for this part of the event. Thank you so much again, and thank you for taking the time and being with us on this nice Monday morning, especially if you're from Italy and you would otherwise be at home enjoying your bridge day. Thank you, and have a nice lunch break, and we will continue with anyone who wants to continue with us at 2:00 in the afternoon with 4 journalists who will talk about the journalistic side of and then the journalistic experience about SLAPPs. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.